That. Okay, if anybody has any questions, any comments, feel free to ask. Otherwise, inshallah, we'll get started. I want to start with a couple of narrations and then a quick activity, inshallah, for us. So there's a nice hadith where one of the eminent companions of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, somebody by the name of Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur. Okay, the Imam Sadiq alayhi salam praises this guy a lot. He was a very important companion. He was himself a scholar, a mufassir of the Quran. He used to teach tafsir of Quran, or he used to teach Quran in the mosque of Kufa. Once he says that I said to Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam that I swear by God, he had a pomegranate. There's a picture of a pomegranate in his hand. He had a pomegranate and he said, I swear by God that if I were to split this pomegranate into two, and if you were to tell me that one of them, half of it is halal and half of it is haram, I would listen to you. O Imam, whatever you say is the law. Okay, whatever your is halal for you, whatever you say is halal, that's halal for me. Whatever you say is haram for me. When the Imam heard him, the Imam was so happy. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam did dua for this individual. So I want you guys to take a moment, think about this. What does this tell us about the idea of taqleed? Isn't this guy saying almost like, I could put aside my intellect. I'm just going to follow you, O Imam Sadiq. Isn't that a bad thing? So sometimes we might think that, okay, to not use our intellect to just follow is very bad. But isn't that what this guy is doing over here? Any comments? Any thoughts about this narration, sisters? You can feel free to write in the chat or just take up the mic and answer. What does this story tell us about taqleed? Anybody?
I think it's not that he's not using his intellect, it's his intellect that leads him to reach a conclusion that the Imam is the person I should be following. So he is still using his intellect, and then he's kind of giving the Imam full right over himself, I guess. So he's like, I'm willing to do anything that you tell me to do because you have more knowledge than I do.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. That behind the scenes, when we do taqleed in the correct way, there is some thinking here. There is a reason why we follow, for example, the Imam. And so this person has very rightfully realized that the Imam is the source, the guide, the divine representative. Whatever he tells me is the law. I don't ask questions here in the sense of like not wanting to follow unless I understand. No, I have determined that whatever the Imam says, that is the law. And so there is a very positive aspect of taqleed that we can see, for example, in this story. Sister Hana Ibrahim is not able to join. The link is not working for her. Maybe you can send her the link that worked for you, Sister Ish'al. I'm surprised the link it shouldn't have changed. It should be the same link. Okay, what I'll do is I will give you the contact right here, Sister Ish'al, of Sayyid Hassan, who is inshallah gonna be able to help. 1 second. If you can have Sister Hana reach out to the Sayyid Hassan, inshallah he will. This is his contact on WhatsApp or just with the phone. Inshallah he will try to troubleshoot this issue. Thank you so much. Okay. Going back to the hadith, another hadith I wanted to share with you guys. Okay, the idea of taqleed. There is a lot of emphasis of this idea of taqleed in the ahadith, in the lives of the imams. Even at the time of the imams, it wasn't like everybody had access to the imam. The imams at times had people who, but in our modern terminology, they were like maraji'. Okay, the imam lived in Medina or he lived in Baghdad or Normally they were in Medina, Samarra, the last few Imams. But they had companions who lived, for example, in the city of Qum or other cities, and those companions who had studied with the Imam, who had trained with the Imam, they had become, in our modern terminology, maraja', that other Shias who didn't have access to the Imams would go to these guys. And at times the Imams even introduced them that these people are very trustworthy, they know the ahkam, go and ask them. One really important hadith we have is this hadith that I will share with you in the chat, which says basically there's a story here that it's narrated from the 11th Imam in a book called the Tafsir of Imam al Askari, where the 11th Imam, is narrating the story about the 6th Imam. I'll summarize it. It's something like this, where the 6th Imam is talking to somebody, and that person is asking the Imam that why is the Quran so critical of the Jews for following bad rabbis, bad scholars? If the scholars were bad people, then why are the common Jews being criticized in the Quran? Okay? And Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, he responds by saying these Jews, when they saw that their rabbis were not good people, they shouldn't have followed them. Okay, these rabbis were doing things that were very clearly unethical, very clearly wrong, going against the intellect, going against the fitrah. Such scholars should not be followed. Okay? At that time, Imam, peace be upon him, he gave a really important statement. I'll just paste the Arabic of it and then I'll paste the translation of it in the chat. He said, فَأَمَّا مَنْ كَانَ. He said, basically, this situation in the Jewish community is the same in the Muslims. That Muslims should do taqleed and follow scholars, but not any scholar. Okay, the Imam said, فَأَمَّا مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاء صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ حَافِظًا لِدِينِهِ مُخَالِفًا عَلَى هَوَى مُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. Okay, I put that in Gemini to translate it, and it came out like this. It gave me, actually, Gemini is so cool that it gave me different options. It's like, do you want to have like a formal translation? Do you want a direct translation, a concise translation? The formal translation was this. As for those jurists, fuqaha, who are the guardians of themselves, meaning they're guarding themselves, protecting their soul, not committing sins, basically, okay, opposing their desire, obedient to Allah. فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. Then it is upon the common people to follow such a scholar, such a jurist. And that's not all the fuqaha, that's those fuqaha that have these kind of qualities. Okay, so there's a lot to say here about this idea of taqleed, but basically, my point is this, that overall the idea is a very logical idea and it's an Islamic idea as well. The Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, they entrusted the Shia community to be in the guidance and follow these certain scholars who have both knowledge and piety. Okay? Inshallah, what I want us to do right now, as we enter in this discussion of ijtihad, and I give you a bunch of rulings that hopefully won't be too boring, I thought we can start off with an activity where I'll let you guys think about this for a few moments. You know, you can even talk to one another privately and come up with examples. I want everybody to try to come up with one example, practical, real example, okay, where you follow somebody else in your life. That shouldn't be too hard, and why this makes sense. Justify it, have the reasoning, the thinking behind it as to why you should follow that, why it makes sense to follow that person. As opposed to that, I want you guys to think of an example, and there are lots of examples with social media, with the news, the biased news, the pro-Israeli news. Find examples of following other people that is wrong, and that maybe you can even find like a good modern example of when people followed somebody else and they were deceived, and they were following somebody who shouldn't have been followed. So I want you guys to somehow, analyze this a little bit and give me why this person should be followed in the first case, and in the second case, that person shouldn't be followed. Okay? I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to do this. Right now in Toronto, the time is 6:14. I'll give you guys about 3-4 minutes, inshallah, to come up with good examples. You can feel free to talk to one another, inshallah. Okay? Anybody want to share their thoughts? I can give you another couple of minutes if you want, but if anybody's ready, Bismillah, you can take up the mic, you can type it out in the chat, share your scenarios that you came up with.
Yeah. So, we were talking and we got through a scenario example for number one, which
Mm-hmm.
is the example of like a police officer being a crossing guard. And in that situation, like, say the traffic lights are not working, and without a leader who's telling us whose turn it is to go, there would be a little bit of chaos and possible danger. So it makes sense to follow somebody who's directing us in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The idea being that they know the correct ruling here, when you're allowed to go, when you're not allowed to go. They are the authority, they are the qualified person to go to. Yeah, that's good, mashallah. I can give you guys another minute if you want to think about the second one. Inshallah, if anybody else wants to share their comments, though, Bismillah. Yes, Sister Masuma?
I was thinking of certain personalities on social media that a lot of times what they claim or what they say or what they preach is different from their actions. And so, like, their actions are not matching up with what they claim to believe in. And that immediately can show you that there's something wrong with them, that you shouldn't follow someone who isn't doing as they say, or like, or their actions are not matching up with their beliefs.
Yeah, definitely. Especially for Islam, we want to be very careful. Like the hadith that we just read told us that, we should go to scholars that both have knowledge and taqwa, piety. Sister Fatima messaged me about number two. When we follow people on the media or news channels, we can be deceived very easily. Sister Fatima, do you want to open that up a little bit more, some examples and why? So what can we do? Does that mean that we don't read the news? What can we try to do to save ourselves from being deceived by fabricated news, biased news?
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah,
Alaikum salam.
I think what I meant was that a lot of the times we rely on news outlets and media for information about that is happening around the world, but we need to be very aware when we follow these people um, that these things are not sometimes a reliable source of information, or they have alternative motives behind different news channels. So when we are following these people, we have to be very aware in order to not be deceived in the way that they intend to.
Definitely, definitely. So these are things to keep in mind. Anybody else? Any final thoughts? A lot of you sisters didn't say anything. If you have anything else you'd like to add, please go ahead. Otherwise, yeah, as Sister Fatima said, like we need to really be careful. Obviously, the idea of doing taqleed and following somebody else is not just logical, it's necessary in life. We can't possibly learn everything in detail ourselves. There's so many different areas of knowledge and specialization. We need to follow other people, but as Sister Fatima said, we need to be very careful who we follow. We have to think about their qualifications. Are they qualified to talk about what they are talking about? And then are they sincere? Do they have an agenda? How honorable, how truthful is their account gonna be? These are all things we need to be very careful about. Okay, I'll pause here again if anybody else wants to add anything. Otherwise, we'll move on, inshallah. Okay, so inshallah, what we want to look at, sisters, today, again, feel free to again ask questions, comments, but what we want to look at is a little bit about this idea of ijtihad and taqleed. First of all, we'll talk about who is a marja. How does somebody become a marja? It's really important to appreciate that this is not an easy task. This is not something that anybody can do very easily. That's why we need to go to Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, people who have spent years of their life, people who worked really hard, who are geniuses, and have really somehow struggled to understand the depth of Islamic law. And we can feel, comfortable that we are now following an expert. Between us and Allah, we can say, okay, oh Allah, I followed somebody who was very qualified. He told me how to do wudu. He told me how to pray. So just kind of appreciating this is really important. So we'll talk first of all about what a marja has to study, and then we'll go specifically to the conditions that in order not just anybody who studies these subjects becomes a marja. There are specific conditions that a marja has. And then a third discussion is how, practically speaking, how do we identify who should be our marja? Why is it that some people follow Ayatollah Sistani, some people follow Ayatollah Khamenei, some people follow Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi? Is there a correct, is it like we should only follow one and the others are making a mistake? Inshallah, we'll look at all of these. So first of all, just very quickly, I want to run through some of the subjects that a marja has to study. A lot of Islam, a lot of the ahadith, in fact, a majority of the tens of thousands of ahadith we have from the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, pertain to the subject of fiqh. Okay, there are huge collections of ahadith that Shia scholars have compiled where they've gathered all of the ahadith to do with salat and all of the ahadith to do with tahara and so on and so forth. Many different subjects of ahkam have tens of thousands of ahadith. The Quran, okay, the Quran is not, we can say it's not, majority of the Holy Quran is not about fiqh, but still a big percentage of it is. Out of maybe more than 6,600 verses, about 500 verses pertain to fiqh. We have in Surah An-Nisa, we have verses about inheritance. We have verses about divorce. Again, in different surahs of the Quran, we have a surah called Surah At-Talaq. Verses about divorce are there. We have a verse about khums. We have verses about prayer. But again, a lot of the details of ahkam are going to be found in the ahadith. But we need to also, a scholar, a mujtahid, a marja needs to also go to the Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, then the ahadith, then the words of previous fuqaha. Okay, that's not there on this slide right now, but that's another thing that definitely a mujtahid needs to go and look at how previous Shia scholars understood the Quran and hadith. What were their differences of opinion? Why did they differ in their opinion? All of this requires a deep knowledge of Arabic. Most of our scholars are Iranians. Their Arabic is not natural for them. They spend years of their life. In fact, don't be surprised if the Iranians know that classical Arabic better because, they worked harder to learn it than the Arabs. But anyways, they spend years of their life learning Arabic. There's a very, very complicated theoretical subject called usul al-fiqh, the principles of jurisprudence. What does that mean? It's basically common discussions that mujtahids needed again and again in different chapters of fiqh. So discussions that didn't pertain just to namaz and prayer or tahara or hajj. There's a common discussion that how, when we're doing fiqh, when we're deriving the law, how do we approach these kinds of hadith, or what do we do when we have differences amongst the hadith, or what does it mean when the imam says something like this? Lots of theoretical discussions to do with fiqh that are not specific to one chapter. The ulama extracted them and they placed it in its own subject called usul al-fiqh. And trust me, this is very, very theoretical. People spend a lot of detail, a lot of time, a lot of effort debating these technical, theoretical details that apply in the derivation of Islamic laws. There's subjects of logic. There's subjects specifically to do with hadith studies. Which hadith are authentic, which hadith are not authentic, the chains of narrators of hadith, understanding the terminology of hadith, which are from like 1,400 years ago. It's hard to go back to ancient texts and understand. You have to learn the lingo of that time. Long story short, tafsir, like I said, some of the verses of Quran pertain to ahkam. Long story short, this is not easy. It requires a lot of work. And then when a scholar has learned these subjects, they need to now start practicing that. They need to start deriving the law themselves and then comparing what their opinion is to other people's opinions, bouncing opinions off one another to improve in their ability. At the end of the day, there is this level that they reach called ijtihad, where now their teacher, for example, who was a qualified mujtahid, approves them and says that you are qualified to be a mujtahid. Right, so this is a tradition that the Shia Hausa has, where basically the scholars give a permission of ijtihad, an ijaza of ijtihad to their students. Let me show you guys something. This will be interesting maybe for you. If you go to Ayatollah Sistani's website and you go to his biography, you will see that there is a picture of the ijaza of ijtihad that he has from his teachers. Okay, so this is a tradition that till now is common in the Hausa, where a mujtahid will give this kind of permission to his students that I now declare you to be a valid mujtahid. Okay, so this is one of the permissions of ijtihad that Ayatollah Sistani has. He has one from Ayatollah Khoi and one from somebody called Hassan al-Hilli, I think. This is from Ayatollah Khoi. Basically, it's like a written letter. These letters, like I said, it's an ancient tradition of the Hausa. At times, they might write some, ethical reminder, some long Islamic kind of message, and then in that they say that this student of mine is qualified to be a mujtahid. This is Ayatollah Sistani's when he was probably very, very young. He may have been a teenager. He may have been in his 20s. May Allah preserve him. Now he's like 90 years old. When he was in his 20s, maybe he was a mujtahid. Okay, so these guys are geniuses. They work really hard. They start really young. Many of them became mujtahids when they were very young, and then they spend the rest of their life teaching and serving the deen of Allah. But there is this idea of at a certain point they become qualified to have their own opinion, and that is what's known as ijtihad. Okay, make sense? Any questions? Any comments? Let me go back to our slides. Okay. The next discussion that I wanted to have with you guys is this idea of, okay, not any mujtahid. So when somebody has studied all those subjects, okay, by the way, that letter that I just showed you is not something necessary for a mujtahid to have. Right? So there would definitely today in the Hawza, in Qum, in Najaf al-Ashraf, you have people who are mujtahids who are themselves following the Islamic law that they have derived, and they know between them and Allah, they know that they are a mujtahid and they are qualified to do that. But they didn't bother to get that permission. The permission is more to show to other people if they ever need to prove. Okay, like for example, there was a time in Iran before the victory of the Islamic Revolution, long, long time ago, where there was a evil king, the Shah, who wanted to. One of the things that the Shah was doing, the father of the last Shah who was overthrown by Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayh, the father of the Shah, Raza Shah, he was trying to put a lot of limitations on Islam and religion. He was not letting women wear hijab, for example. He was limiting the azadari of Imam Hussein, alayhi salam. One of the things he was doing is he wasn't letting scholars wear the turban easily. And so only if you had a permission of ijtihad, you were given the permission to wear the amama. That's how that's how much he was trying to limit and crack down on religion. So for example, at that time people were, it became a big deal where people who maybe didn't care to have it, they went and obtained this permission of ijtihad from the marja to say that, okay, I am a mujtahid, I am allowed to wear the amama. But generally speaking, it's not something really required. Okay. Now, moving on, there are a lot of mujtahids today. Who becomes a marja' taqleed? Just because somebody is a mujtahid doesn't automatically make them a marja'. We mentioned this last week that there is a difference between marja' and mujtahid. Marja' are those top tier of mujtahids who are the highest level that other people are following. The translation of the word marja, taqleed, would be source of emulation. That other people, normal people like me and you, muqallidun, we are following, we are doing taqleed of a marja. Make sense? So these are different qualities that somebody needs to have to be a marja. I'll leave adala for the last because that's a nice discussion that I thought we could spend a couple of minutes discussing in detail. But first of all, obviously, a marja has to be a mujtahid. What we just talked about, that they studied all these Islamic sciences, they practiced deriving law for so long that they are now qualified to have their own opinion. That's one of the rulings, one of the conditions. There's adala, we'll come back to adala. They need to be alive. This is really important. This is something that preserves the active nature of the hauza. This is amazing. Imagine for the last 1,200, 300 years, we Shia have always had a marja. That's pretty amazing. You can actually trace back the chain of student teacher going back to the imams. Ayatollah Sistani is the student of Ayatollah Khoi. Ayatollah Khoi is the student of, I don't know, Naini. Naini is the student of Akhund Khurasani. You can go back hundreds and hundreds of years, all the way back to the Imam. There has always been a living marja. So by default, we'll come to a detail here about remaining on the taqleed of somebody, but by default, when a boy or a girl becomes baligh and they start to do taqleed, they must choose a living marja and then follow them. They have to be sane, obviously. They have to be male. They have to be Shia, obviously. They have to be of legitimate birth. The main thing that is going to require some research and the main thing that causes the difference of opinion is this idea of a'lamiyah, that the marja is supposed to be, this is itself based on ihtiyat wajib, which we talked about last week and maybe we'll talk about again. It's like our maraji are telling us that this is not a fatwa, but it's something that is so, it makes a lot of sense. It's very logical. So they're telling us that it's based on obligatory precaution, ihtiyat wajib. We have to go to the most knowledgeable of all the maraji. What does that mean? There's this idea that, okay, mujtahids are not all at one level. Some of them have practiced their ijtihad. They are such geniuses. They have complete mastery over hadith and usul and the different subjects that they are more likely to derive the law correctly. Okay, so the most knowledgeable, the most capable, the most qualified person from the mujtahids would be called the a'lam. A'lam just means most knowledgeable. Okay, so ihtiyat wajib, we have to go to the most knowledgeable. We'll talk about practically how we would, identify who the most knowledgeable is. But if there's no questions or comments about any of the other conditions aside from adala, I thought we could spend a few minutes talking about adala here. It's not directly related to ijtihad and taqleed, other than the fact that it's a condition of a marja, but it's an ethical kind of discussion, and it's a good reminder, inshallah, for us. So I want everybody to try to think to yourself, what does adala mean? Just to give you some context here, as Shia, we believe that even the person who leads prayers, it can't just be anybody. They need to be an adil person. So leadership in Shiaism has this quality associated with it. Be it the leader of prayer, be it something very, very important like the marja' taqleed. So I want you guys to tell me, what do you think the word adala means? Bismillah, type it out in the chat, take up the mic, whatever comes to your mind. How would you define adala and explain it, not just with a one word definition, but actually, what does it really mean? What is the reality of adala? Sister Hannah, someone who does not commit sins in public. So, Sister Hannah, if they commit sins in private, they are an adil person? Sister Walia Fatima says justice. Someone who has the ability to do justice even in his daily things. Okay, you're right. Adala would translate into justice, but still a little bit more like what is that, what exactly does that mean? What is the reality of being just? First of all, how can we identify it as other people? But even beyond that, what is is there a way we can define what exactly that means? Justice is a word that everybody loves, but obviously a Muslim has a different definition of justice as opposed to a non-Muslim. They both claim to love justice, but their idea of justice should be different. Sister Sarah, someone who understands the right place of things and then strives to maintain this balance. Yeah, that is one of the meanings of justice, not maybe within this context of fiqh and qualities of a leader, but yeah, one of the meanings of justice in theology is putting everything in its place. So I think in that sense, Sister Sarah, you are correct. But still, more with regards to a leader, with regards to a marja, anybody have any other thoughts of what exactly justice means? Like being, Sister Waliya Fatima, like being on the righteous side, going against dhulm. Definitely, that would be one of the consequences that if somebody has adala, that would mean that they would be against the oppressors, they would be fighting against oppressors. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Okay. If not, let me read what Imam Khomeini says, and this is the common definition. Okay, Sister Asiya Kazmi, someone who has integrity and is consistent in their values. Again, definitely, I would say we can say that's a consequence of this adala. That if they have adala, they would have constant values. There is in fiqh, there is a certain definition, a definition that I'm looking for. Mr. Masuma Hasnain, sorry, treating others in a manner that is just in terms of consequences and fulfilling others' rights. Sister Sana Zahra, fulfilling the rights of people, haqqun nas. All of these are very good. All of these are correct. In terms of fiqh, however, we're talking, or even maybe not just in fiqh, in Islam, when we talk about justice, we're talking about a deeply rooted characteristic that is in the heart of a person, of a believer. Taqwa, adala, it's a characteristic. What does it mean exactly? It means that they don't commit sins. Okay, that characteristic will, that force that is in their soul will stop them from committing sins. Yeah, I'm just going to read what Imam Khomeini says, which is in our book. He says, Adalat is a state of the soul that uh, forces somebody to have taqwa. And basically, the way he has said it here, this is important to know, is that it means that they don't ever commit a major sin and they do not consistently commit a minor sin. This is the common opinion. By the way, Ayatollah Sistani, he doesn't have this. He says that no, the proper definition of adala, of taqwa, means that the person won't commit any sin. There's no difference between major sin and minor sin. But the common opinion, that's Ayatollah Sistani, common opinion is actually that there is a difference between the concept of major sin versus minor sin. Somebody who commits a major sin even once, they're no longer an adil person until they repent. But a minor sin, if you do the minor sin just once, you don't lose that station of adala. If you were to consistently commit a minor sin again and again and again, then that would be itself a major sin that would remove the state of adala. Big question here. What is a major sin? What is a minor sin? Again, I'll open the floor. If anybody knows, there's a technical definition here of what constitutes a major sin. This is a concept in the Quran, in the Hadith. Kabira, dhunub al-kabira, gunah kabire. If anybody wants to take a stab at what is the definition of a major sin, I'll give you guys a moment. Anybody want to try? What's the definition of a major sin? There's a few different criteria. Two, we can say main criteria, but ulama have even added more. If some of these criteria are there, then ulama say that, okay, that is a major sin. Stehana has asked a good question. Inshallah, we'll come to this, that how do we, practically determine, for example, for prayer, how do we know somebody is adil? So there's two things. First of all, we want to define adala, and then we want to say, okay, practically, what does that mean in our life? How do we judge? How do we determine? But in terms of the definition, for now, we're just discussing that. And we said that adala is a reality in the soul of a person. It's a characteristic, a state of their heart whereby they do not commit sins. Okay? There is a technical definition to a greater sin. I'll just put it in the chat. For example, any sin that Allah has promised the punishment of hell for. Okay? Or any sin that the Imams have told us is an explicit, is a greater sin. There are more, but these are like two of the main ways we can figure it out. Okay, we have a hadith, Imam Rada alayhi salam, other Imams, they listed off. They said adultery and interest and I don't know, killing somebody, these are major sins. And there's a long list of them. Or any sin that we see in the Quran, it tells us that if you eat the money of an orphan, then it's like you've eaten fire or something. Okay, so something like that, where very clearly the Quran is saying that this sin, you're going to be punished with fire of hell for it. That means that that is a greater sin. Okay, so there is this concept that certain sins, there's like a list of them that ulama have given us, are greater sins. Let me just give you one quick example. Ayatollah Khamenei says that when it comes to lying, not every lie is a greater sin. If you lie about religion, that is a greater sin. You say that Imam Ali did this when he didn't do that. That is a greater sin. But let's say I lie to you about something very trivial. I tell you that, oh yeah, I woke up for my Fajr prayers today and I didn't actually, I slept in. Okay, that's not a greater sin, according to Ayatollah Khamenei. So, there is this idea that certain sins are still sins. They're still haram. We should never do them. We should always remember that, we are disobeying Allah. This is going against what Islam wants from us. We're harming our soul. But at the end of the day, it's a minor sin. And there is a subtle difference. Most of our ulama say that a minor sin would not remove somebody from the state of adalah. Sister Amina has asked for a list. I can give you right now a list from Ayatollah Sistani in Arabic. Okay, so I'll do that, and then you can, inshallah, uh, paste it into like ChatGPT and get it translated if you want. Okay, so let me just show you guys. If we go to again sistani.org on in his book of Ahkam, and there might be something like this in the English Islamic laws book as well. I'm just not so familiar with it. You can inshallah search and find it probably. By the way, there's a really, really beautiful, valuable book that you probably have heard of by a great scholar called Shahid Dastaghaib Shirazi. Shahid Dastaghaib Shirazi wrote a book that's called Gunahan Kabira. Okay, so it's called Greater Sins. Okay, so this is a fatwa of Ayatollah Sistani, masala number 30. I'll just put the link here. Okay, this first mas'ala, and it's really long. It goes into when he talks about ghiba, within the same discussion, he talks about exceptions of when ghiba is allowed. So the list is really long, but the point is this entire page is giving you a list of the greater sins in Islam according to Ayatollah Sistani. The book Greater Sins is definitely available in English. It's probably on alislam.org. I don't think the English translation is that good, unfortunately, but nonetheless, it's a very valuable source. The author has discussed each one of these greater sins in a lot of detail, given ahadith, given nice stories. Okay. Anyways, I forgot what we were saying, but let's now go back, inshallah, to the discussion of um Adala. Oh yeah, okay. So there was a question that Sister Hannah had asked. Let me address that. So inshallah, now we've clarified this idea of what is Adala. That Adala is a characteristic of the heart. That somebody who has it, they don't commit sins. So practically, what does that mean? How do we identify that? There are different ways that our ulama have told us. When we come to A'lamiyya, we'll talk about ways that you can determine that somebody is the most knowledgeable. It's kind of similar here, that there are different ways to determine something. One of them is that you're sure about it. Okay, let's say you've lived with this person. I spent so much time with Sheikh Fulan, and I know he's a very pious person. Okay, I'm certain about it. Okay, if I'm certain about his piety, then I definitely can pray behind him. I know he's a pious person. There's another time where, okay, I'm not certain about it myself, but there's enough evidence that gives me certainty. I see that this sheikh is like trusted by other people who wouldn't trust him unless he was pious. So there's some reason for me to trust him. When it comes to adala, Sister Hannah, since you asked, we shouldn't be too picky about this matter. Okay, our ulama, they Maraja even they say that there's something called husn zahir, that if somebody looks like a pious person, there's no reason for us to doubt them. Okay, it appears for all practical purposes, it appears that they are a pious person. We haven't seen them commit a sin. They have this demeanor of a pious person. We can assume they are pious for the matter of praying behind them. So we shouldn't be so picky when it comes to prayer. As Shias, it is an important thing. Okay, the guy is committing sins, we can't pray behind him. We should somehow give precedence to somebody who has taqwa, definitely. But at the same time, we shouldn't become in doubt and say, oh, the default is everybody is a sinner until I've confirmed that they are pious. That's also wrong. Inshallah, Sister Hannah, I hope that answers the question.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up for that. Like, let's say if it's at a mosque or at an event somewhere where you don't see the person, you don't know who it is, but someone steps up to lead and you know, like, it's not a scholar. To what extent do we have to ensure, like, that they're adil? Because, like, they've stepped up to lead the Jamaat namaz, but I don't know who it is. I don't know. There's a barrier. I'm not sure. I can't even see if they look pious. So, like, how would I determine, or am I, like, can I just pray behind them?
Let me see if I can find where it says this matter. But overall, like I'm saying, that we shouldn't be so we don't need to like assume that everybody is not adil. There's this idea that okay, they seem like a pious person. If you know that, for example, in this mosque, they wouldn't just tell anybody to lead. Okay, there are people who have some kind of a filter. They, if that's not the case, maybe it is a problem though. Let me just quickly see if I can find this. It's definitely here somewhere in the discussion on uh, taqleed in the beginning of, yeah, see, so this right here, again, I'm looking at the Arabic ahkam of Ayatollah Sistani. He says that one of the ways of figuring out adala basically is husn al-zahir. That's just what I wrote in the chat, right? What does it mean? He says it means that they have a good interaction with people. They have a religious demeanor, I would translate it as suluke dini. They have a religious demeanor. And the other way overall, so when we come to Alamiya, we'll mention this, that overall, if we want to establish something in Islam, we always have two ways that we can establish it. One is our own certainty, and the other is this idea of a bayyina. Okay, I'll write this out. It's important to know. It's a term that you guys should learn. Bayyina. What does bayyina mean? Bayyina means that two just people bear witness. Here, even if I don't have certainty, I can say that, okay, I'm not sure, but I'm following the witness of two just people. This comes up in a lot of different ahkam of the Sharia. And so even over here, when it comes to adala or husn zahir, we can determine it in one of these ways, that either I'm certain that this guy has a demeanor of a religious person, he has husn zahir, or two just people bear witness. So, Sister Hannah, going back to your situation, I don't want to make like a categorical statement that every time somebody steps forward to lead at any mosque, you can just pray behind them. But at the same time, like I was saying, we don't need to have this default assumption that everybody is a sinner. Okay, if they have a demeanor, they seem like a religious person, you can pray behind them. That's with regards to the condition of adala. Okay, there are other conditions about prayer, like being able to differentiate between the letters, which unfortunately that very, very often is not there. This is something maybe we don't need to go into right now, but that makes people's life much more difficult. Anyways, okay, let's go back to the ahkam. We don't have much time left. Some final points that I wanted to make. Okay, so inshallah, all the conditions of the marja is now clear. The practical thing though is, how do we figure this out? And inshallah, I want to give you guys a homework assignment, and the homework assignment is to somehow, yourself think about what was the way that you determined who your marja is. And even if you know somebody else who came up with another conclusion, that could be valid as well. And so, come up with kind of different ways of determining this. But practically, like, what has happened in people's lives around you and in your own life. But what are the ahkam here? Again, going back to what I just said, either we get certainty that this Ayatollah Sistani is a'lam. How would I get certainty? Maybe I myself have studied in the Hawza, and I've looked at their work in fiqh, and I can tell that, wow, Ayatollah Sistani is a genius. He is a level above everybody else. That's rare. That's for people who have really like worked in the Hawza a lot. What's more common is, no, just by talking to people, by asking scholars around me, by the common consensus of the community, I've determined that Ayatollah Sistani is alam. And that's fine. If it's given me confidence in this statement that he is alam, that confidence that I have is enough. I can follow that. Okay? But just like I told you a few moments ago, if I don't, let's say I'm really in doubt, then I can always go to the witness of two people. But over here, it does become complicated, because the idea, as you can see, is that there should be two people who bear witness that Mr. Ayatollah X is A'lam, but then there shouldn't be two other qualified experts who have a different opinion. If you can find that, where you ask two people and they tell you one marja, and you don't know of any other experts who are saying something else, then you can follow this. This, as I told you, is called a bayyina. So when do you follow a bayyina? You follow a bayyina when you're not sure yourself. If you yourself have come to a certainty, or even almost 100%, like you've come to a very, very strong conclusion that you're very confident in this, that Ayatollah X is alam, then you're sorted, inshallah. You can follow him simply because of that certainty that you have, that confidence that you have. Again, I want to pause here if anybody has any questions, any comments. This is really important. So, we don't want to just go with the flow if we have absolutely no confidence in it. We have to research enough that we have attained confidence or followed a bayina. Maybe this issue of bayina might be possible. Like, you can talk to experts, you can read the opinion of experts, but I think what's more practical for us is the confidence, I think. At what age, Sister Amina has asked, do you have to choose a marja? Basically, when you become baligh, it's wajib at the age of bulugh. It's now wajib for you to follow the Sharia correctly, and either do taqleed, or if you're a mujtahid, you do ijtihad, or ihtiyat, as we had. One of the things that's there in the notes, inshallah, you can look at the notes that I sent today, and we had mentioned it last week, is that there are 3 different ways to determine the ahkam of Islam. Either you are a mujtahid yourself, or you do taqlid, or you do ihtiyat. And ihtiyat is very difficult at times. It requires somebody who has researched all the different opinions and can then try to follow the hardest of all opinions or repeat their action so that it's in accordance to all the different opinions out there. Okay. Inshallah, if there's no questions or comments, just some final points here, sisters. One of them is the idea of doing taqleed of a dead marja. So we said we're not allowed to follow a marja who has passed away if we are beginning taqleed. If we're just becoming baligh, we're starting taqleed. At this point, we must choose the living a'lam marja. By the way, guys, there's a very important thing to keep in mind, that it's not necessarily the case that there's one a'lam. This is something that I think applies in the world today, where the idea of a'lamiyya, you reach a tier of the highest level where it's no longer possible to differentiate. This is a claim that can be made, at least, that we have a highest tier, Ayatollah Khamenei, Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Makarim. They're all such amazing experts that it's not really possible now to differentiate between them. If that's the case, that makes our life much easier, by the way. Anyways, coming back to this issue, um, if somebody was doing taqleed of a marja, let's say our parents 40 years ago, they were doing taqleed of Ayatollah Khoi, and then he passed away. Most maraji say that you need to go to the living marja, and if they allow you, you can choose to continue following them. You can also choose to switch over to the living marja. But if the living marja allows you, you need to get his permission. Then you can continue to follow the dead marja. Ayatollah Sistani here has a unique opinion where he says you have to actually compare the two of them. And if the one who died is more knowledgeable than the living one, you have to remain on the taqleed of the dead marja. Anyways, that's Ayatollah Sistani. Most people don't say that. And regardless, as far as I've seen, every marja allows you. Nobody says that, oh, you have to switch over. Uh, if you consider them to be at the same level, most maraja would say you can choose. Either you can continue to remain on the deceased marja as taqleed, or you can switch over to the living. Ayatollah Sistani says that no, if they're a'lam, you have to remain. So actually, the common opinion is that even if the dead one is a'lam, you still have a choice to switch over. I hope I didn't just confuse you guys. Yes, Sister Hannah? Good.
If someone, let's say, chooses to follow the dead marja, but because they're doing it through the permission of the alive marja, can they choose which laws to follow from which, or it has to be like they choose one marja to follow in this scenario, like where they're following someone who's deceased?
So overall, one of the Sister Fatima, you have another question? Anyway, Sister Hannah, overall, there is a discussion about following multiple maraja, and it's allowed based on this assumption that you consider them to be equal. If you consider them to be at an equal level, then you can follow multiple maraja. You can pick, I'm going to follow Ayatollah Khamenei for some of my ahkam, Ayatollah Sistani for some of my ahkam. Okay? So when it comes to the deceased, this is important that we have to somehow compare, are they alam than the living, or are they at the same level as the living? What I've seen is this discussion that you have to switch over, meaning like altogether. I understood it to be altogether, just switch over from the dead one to the living one. And like I said, most of the maraji would say that you have a choice. Even if the living one is at a lower level, you have a choice. You can switch over or you can remain. Ayatollah Sistani has a unique opinion where he says, if the dead one was more knowledgeable, you have to remain. So yeah.
So would this ruling of being able to choose like which laws to follow from which maraja. It has to be like you believe them to be at equal level, but does that mean for any law or for just the ones which you like we talked about last week, like the rujuu ones, or like any law?
Yeah, so by the way, the time has come to an end. If any sisters do need to leave, then please don't worry. You can feel free to head out. Um, I've asked, Sister Hannah, I've asked people from both the office of Ayatollah Sistani and the office of Ayatollah Khamenei in Qom, and they've told me that no, it's like overall, if you've determined that they are at the same level, you can just pick and choose and go back and forth, even on fatawa. So yeah, that actually would make our life a lot easier and change things significantly. A lot of people don't know this, but I've got specific people I've talked to in both the offices that have said this to me. And it makes sense. Even, recently we had a conference in Toronto at JCC, I Care, where Sayyid Sulaiman, one of the scholars from America, was talking about end of life rulings, end of life ahkam, and he was promoting this idea. He was saying that some of these rulings to do with end of life matters are much more difficult with some maraji versus other maraji. So why don't we just, pick the easier maraji and follow their rulings? And he was saying that that's not a bad thing because we're still respecting the system of the Hausa of, that top tier of maraji. And then amongst that top tier, yeah, we're following the easiest, the most practical. That's fine. So anyways, okay. Inshallah, I'll try to send you guys some homework questions to, inshallah, make you think about this a little bit more. And I did send notes. Please do make a point to go through the notes before next session, inshallah. I'll stick around if anybody has questions. I see another sister has asked a question, but again, time is finished. If anybody needs to go, please don't worry. I have heard that if two maraji are equally a'lam, you have to follow them both as per the more conservative approach. Is this true? Long story short, Sister Sarah, that's not what I've understood. Okay, there are some statements in the books that may indicate that it's complicated, but talking to the offices of Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani, they didn't give me that kind of a complicated answer. They simply said no. If they're at the same level of A'lamiyya, if that's your conclusion, you can pick and choose amongst them.
So in that case, whose like taqlid do you do? Like, do you just if you determine them to be equal?
It's like you pick whose taqlid you want to do. You can say, okay, I'm going to follow Ayatollah Sistani for Najasat and Ayatollah Khamenei for Khums, and you know that you're following this one for this and that one for that.
Thank you.
Okay, sisters, take care. Fi amanillah.